What if I told you I know how to steal an election? Would you believe me? You should, because I've got the plans and we're going to go through them today. Plus, we've got to talk about a new survey showing the two different Americas that we're living in. And we're halfway through June, so I've got a slew of Pride Month news for you. We've got a loaded show today for episode 37. Let's get into it. I'm Blake Watson, and this is We the Free. One of the best ways you can help our show, other than by sharing today's content, is by picking up some We the Free merch at wethefreeshow.com. You can be the Salt and Light you were meant to be by wearing the Salt and Light shirt, or by sipping your coffee from the Salt and Light mug, or you can sport the God Bless America shirt, and of course, the classic We the Free crest tee. We've even got stickers and a Smells Like Freedom candle. That's right, so check out our merch today at wethefreeshow.com. I've got to be honest about something that I've had unsettled feelings about for the last few months. Why isn't Joe Biden campaigning anywhere? I know he didn't do very much back in 2020, but this time he's doing almost nothing. Strategically, I guess I can make a case for that. You know, Biden being out on the campaign trail could do more harm than good. He's way worse cognitively than he was 4 years ago. But my second unsettling feeling comes from the fact that there hasn't been a departure from the weakest candidate the Democrats have had in a long time. Why aren't they dumping Biden? Have you seen any Biden campaign ads, campaign signs, or flags anywhere? Do you see any enthusiasm from anybody in favor of Joe Biden? All that I'm saying is that something is off, and it's as if the Democrats are not worried at all. They don't even act worried. They hardly even pretend like they're concerned about Biden's performance this November. And how could you not be? Trump's favorability has only risen steadily for 2 years. He's ahead of Biden in something like 6 of 7 swing states, and Trump's support just skyrocketed among independents and moderates 2 weeks ago after his conviction. Yet, the Democrats seem completely at ease, and that makes me uneasy. Now, I think I know what the answer is, and you probably know what it is as well. I've been sitting on this story for a month at least, but here's the headline from justfacts.com. Study: 10 to 27% of non-citizens are illegally registered to vote. I'm just going to cut right to the gist of the study and then we'll break it all down. They found the U.S. Census recorded more than 19 million adult non-citizens, 19 million, living in the U.S. during 2022. Given their voter registration rates, this means that about 2 million to 5 million of them are illegally registered to vote. These figures are potentially high enough to overturn the will of the American people in major elections, including congressional seats and the presidency. You heard that right. Given the fact that there are over 20 million non-citizens living in the United States, the research shows that enough of them are able to illegally participate in elections, enough to make a difference. Now, I've talked about this before, a handful of times since September. On September 28th, 2023, I spent an entire hour explaining something from the academic world known as LAT-CRIT, or the Latino Critical Theory. Please go back and watch or listen to that full teaching, but I'll summarize for the sake of our conversation today. LAT-CRIT is a social movement which borrows the exact framework of critical race theory. Both of these social movements come from the Marxist academics. Therefore, the intent of these scholarly concoctions is revolution. That's what Marx created. They're just following his formula. CRT gave birth to BLM in the United States, and look at the revolutionary, incendiary havoc it caused in America. Well, lat crit is the Latin version of this theory. 9 months ago, I explained that lat crit promotes the idea that those who enter the country illegally, what we used to call illegal aliens, are more American than any white person here. They shouldn't have to assimilate into white culture or become a United Statesian because this land is rightfully theirs. It belongs to them. Therefore, their entrance, no matter the legal process, is irrelevant. The important thing to remember about Marxist social movements is their violent, destructive nature. Now, look to our southern border and the Biden administration's immigration policies. You see, the insanely liberal professors and theorists call it Latino critical theory. We call it replacement theory. That's just the designation, that it's the conservative explanation of the divisive and destructive ideology that liberals have espoused. It's their creation. We just gave it that name. Now let's get into the data. Rewind the clock back to 2014. President Obama is in office. An academic journal called Electoral Studies published their research on how often non-citizens were voting, which, it goes without saying, is completely illegal. Their data for this initial study was from the 2008 general election when Obama was elected to his first term and the 111th Congress was elected as well. This is what they found. Number one, roughly 1/4 of non-citizens were likely registered to vote. 1/4. Number two, 6.4% of these non-citizens actually voted. And number three, 82% of them voted for Obama. So 1/4 of them were illegally registered to vote through fraudulent means, which we'll talk about in a moment. Almost 7% of them participated in the 2008 election, and almost all of them voted for Barack Obama. The study then drew some obvious conclusions to this information. President Obama was elected. The Democrats controlled the entire Congress. They passed Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. Justice Sotomayor was confirmed to the Supreme Court, and we could keep going, but you get the idea. All of this happened as a likely consequence of non-citizen participation in the election. And then JustFacts brought the receipts for all this. They demonstrated that these numbers came from two sources: a national survey in which almost 15% of non-citizens they themselves admitted they were registered to vote, but then they used a national database of registered voters that revealed what portion of those non-citizens lied and were actually registered to vote. That's how they came up with the 25% number. It was from these same data sets that they determined that close to 6% of them actually voted. They actually participated and indicated who they voted for. Well, that was 10 years ago. And they've just recently updated the study to include data from 2022. Here's the information they found. So brace yourselves. Given that about 10 to 27% of them are currently registered, this means about 5 to 13% of them will illegally vote in the 2024 presidential and congressional elections. The U.S. Census recorded a population of 19.7 million voting age non-citizens in the U.S. during 2022. This is an absolute minimum because the census doesn't count masses of non-citizens who falsely claim to be citizens or don't fill out census surveys at all. In other words, there are upwards of 20 million non-citizens living in the United States. Also, the figure of 19.7 million doesn't include multitudes of non-citizens who've entered since 2022. This includes people who legally immigrated, crossed the border illegally, or were allowed into the country under the Biden administration's parole policies. Based on the data above, roughly 1 million to 2.7 million non-citizens will illegally vote in the 2024 presidential and congressional elections. In other words, based on the census data and years of election data, we could have a minimum of 1 million votes cast by non-citizens in the 2024 election. Now, I can hear someone trying to diminish the significance of that number, given that the total voter turnout for the general election, but that's merely looking at the final total number count. You have to consider how the electoral system works. Joe Biden won the 2020 election because he got 306 electoral votes and Trump got 232. How did Joe Biden get that number? Because he was victorious enough in enough states which would allot him the minimum of 270 electoral votes to win. But in those key battleground states, where the vote counting stopped on election night and then magically went for Biden the next day, Trump only lost those states by a slim margin of like 3,000 to 7,000 votes or thereabouts. That's all it took. But that's how he won. So do you see what I'm saying? If you take 1 to 2 million illegal votes and spread them across 50 electoral states, or heck, 5 swing states, that's literally enough to change the outcome of an election. And in case you haven't been paying attention, non-citizens are being shipped all over the United States, and they have been for the last 3 years. Do you think that that's just some coincidence? Like, well, we've got to put them somewhere. No, it's all a strategic choice to spread electoral corruption. It's Cloward and Piven, it's Lat Crit, it's electoral and migrational Marxism. All this to say, I'm afraid the Democrats are sitting back with their feet up, coasting into election season because this was their plan all along. Electorally replace the American people to preserve political power. That's the only feasible path to the destruction of America and the road to globalism. This has been their plan for decades. Biden is just really the first one to put the pedal on the floor and use it. That's why he's been so unashamedly radical in every way. This is how they intend to steal the election. The question for us today is, what can we do to stop it? That's their plan. What can we do to stop it? There's a couple of major things in the works at the federal level. One of them is a congressional bill called the SAVE Act, which stands for Safeguard American Voter Eligibility. It's H.R. 8281, and it's really an amendment to the Voter Registration Act from back in 1993. The summary reads, to amend the National Voter Registration Act of 1993 to require proof of United States citizenship to register an individual to vote in elections for federal office and for other purposes. The bill also requires states to remove non-citizens from their existing voter rolls. But all of the mainstream outlets are mocking and condemning the bill, like NPR, saying it's already illegal. There's never been evidence to support the idea non-citizens are voting at anything other than minuscule numbers. The Biden campaign issued a statement saying, by virtually all measures, the 2020 election was among the most secure in our nation's history. Donald Trump lost to President Biden by over 7 million votes, fair and square. Donald Trump is a threat to our democracy and a danger to our Constitution. So I just quoted you a lot of the data. So why would you unanimously oppose a bill which you claim to be useless and redundant, and also at the same time call the effort threatening and dangerous? Maybe it's because they've known the truth all along, that the non-citizen participation is actually sizable, and it largely tends toward the Democrats in the presidency and in Congress. The data clearly shows that, in the least, it has a likely impact on electoral votes, congressional seats, policy, and the presidency. The problem is that the legislative process will probably kill the bill in the Senate. And by some crazy chance that it did pass in the Senate, you could bank on the likelihood that Joe Biden would put the nail in its coffin. The same is true for H.R. 7109, the Equal Representation Act. We talked about that last month. The bill would require a citizenship question on the census. It passed in the House with 100% of the Democrats opposing it. We talked about why that is, but again, the Democrat-led Senate will very likely kill the bill, or the president would veto it before becoming law. Yes, there are federal laws against non-citizen voting and registration, but the huge problem is that when you're asked the citizenship question, you're not asked to prove it. JustFacts reported several states, including Arizona and Georgia, tried to require people who register with the federal form to provide documentary evidence of citizenship, but they were blocked by court rulings supported by the Obama administration. So instead of requiring concrete proof of citizenship, the federal registration form allows you to use things like a utility bill or bank statement. Then, as you get into the state distinctions, when you're asked to provide the last 4 digits of your social security number or a valid driver's license number, most of the states give the option of leaving the box empty or selecting none if you don't have either of those identifications. In New Jersey, for example, if you don't have a driver's license or social security number, you can use a store membership ID, a student ID, a rent receipt, or government check to register. Back in 2016, there's an actress, Gina Rodriguez. She's a television actress. She asked the outgoing President Obama if Dreamers and non-citizens would be deported if they voted in the election. Here's what Obama said.
Many of the millennials, dreamers, undocumented citizens, and I call them citizens because they contribute to this country, are fearful of voting. So if I vote, will immigration know where I live? Will they come for my family and deport us?
Not true.
Okay.
And the reason is, first of all, when you vote, you are a citizen yourself, and there is not a situation where the voting rolls somehow are transferred over and people start investigating, et cetera. The sanctity of the vote is strictly confidential in terms of who you voted for. If you have a family member who maybe is undocumented, then you have an even greater reason to vote.
This has been a huge fear presented, especially during this election.
And the reason that fear is promoted is because they don't want people voting. People are discouraged from voting, and part of what is important for Latino citizens is to make your voice heard, because you're not just speaking for yourself, you're speaking for family members, friends, classmates of yours in school,
entire community,
who may not have a voice, who can't legally vote.
What's funny about that clip is that Trump became the president, and 2 years later in 2018, in exchange for funding the border wall and more border security and more immigration enforcement, Trump offered the Democrats amnesty to 1.8 million Dreamers. Do you remember that? And they wouldn't take the deal. They showed us back then that, number one, they don't care about non-citizens becoming legal citizens, and number two, that they don't want border security. All of this shows you that there are several loopholes at both the federal and state registration levels, and although Republicans are trying to do something to stop it, the Democrats control the Senate and the White House. So there's effectively nothing that they can do. Even if the federal government passed all sorts of bills and protections, our next problem is identity fraud. The chief actuary of the Social Security Administration estimated over a decade ago that almost 1 million illegal immigrants worked in 2010 by using fraudulent birth certificates and another 1.8 million from using Social Security numbers that didn't match their names. In 2002, an investigation by the U.S. Government Accountability Office found that the use of fraudulent documents by non-citizens is extensive, quote, extensive. In 1998, immigration officials in Los Angeles seized almost 2 million counterfeit documents, which included fraudulent permanent resident cards and Social Security cards, which they said were headed for distribution points around the country. In 2005, the New York Times, of all news outlets, reported the following. Currently available for about $150 on street corners in just about any immigrant neighborhood in California, a typical fake ID package includes a green card and a Social Security card. In 2017, California State Senate leader Kevin De Leon, a Democrat, said the following.
Also agree, and I think Mr. Stone and Mr. Anderson will also agree, everyone on this committee will agree, that immigrants who come to this country, the vast majority, irrespective of their legal status, are very hardworking, law-abiding residents who pay their taxes every year. And the reality is, with the executive order and the criteria that has been developed, any individual, I can tell you half of my family, would be eligible for deportation under the executive order. Because if they got a false Social Security card, if they got a false identification, if they got a false driver's license prior to us passing AB 60, if they got a false green card, and anyone who has family members, who are undocumented knows that almost entirely everybody has secured some sort of false identification. That's what you need to survive, to work. They are eligible for massive deportation.
Almost everybody has secured some sort of false identification. Now, let me give you one more piece of evidence, which is from just a couple months ago, the spring of 2024. This is a leaked memo from an NGO in Mexico. The group is called Resource Center Matamoros, a non-government organization in the Mexican border city of Matamoros. They're right on the border of Brownsville, Texas, which is the southernmost tip of Texas. What does this organization do? Well, I'll read their own words. This is a posted flyer or memo on site in Matamoros. It reads, "Welcome, immigrants. The Resource Center is a complex of 6 offices that is home to HIAS, which provides legal assistance and assistance in obtaining formal documents for job search and integration into the city of Matamoros while they wait to access the asylum process in the U.S. We support the legal team by all possible means, including going to the camp to deliver documentation or gather people for consultations before their hearings. Remember to vote for President Biden when you're in the United States. We need another 4 years of his term to stay open." In other words, this is an NGO which helps get migrants across the border. Oh yeah, and they also urge all the migrants to vote for Joe Biden under threat of Trump closure. Now, the RCM memo mentioned another organization, which they basically serve as a front for, HIAS, or the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, an American nonprofit organization that provides humanitarian aid and assistance to refugees. Listen, we're not going to go too far down this sinister black hole, but Secretary Mayorkas, Alejandro Mayorkas, is a former board member of HIAS, meaning that he has direct ties to the RCM, the NGO in Mexico, and worse, George Soros, the financial villain at the center of all our political problems. His Open Society Foundation has given numerous grants to HIAS. I know. I'm sure your jaw was as agape as mine was. Follow the rabbit trail. George Soros to the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, to Alejandro Mayorkas, to the Resource Center in Matamoros, to who knows how many illegal migrants are being told to vote for President Biden when you're in the United States. So now what? Well, because of federalism and the framers' writing in Article 1, Section 4 of the United States Constitution, individual states get to decide how to conduct elections. But that article articulates that Congress can at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations. So, I only see a few things that we can do. Okay, here we go. First of all, states can pass their own laws to protect voter registration and voter validation apart from the federal government. That's what the founding fathers wanted. So contact your governor's office today. Contact your local county election commissions. Ask them if they will require actual proof of citizenship and what verification they do have as to the validity of the documents presented. There are certain states where this is extra critical. I'm talking to all of you in Georgia, in North Carolina, Pennsylvania and Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin and Michigan. All of you need to be calling and emailing and visiting your state and local representatives and officials. All of you in those 7 swing states account for 93 of the electoral votes this November. But every single state is equally represented in Congress. Secondly, we need to vote early. There's a lot of pros to voting early, but the main one for us is the avoidance of election day chaos. If most of us will vote early, there's no excuse for multi-day tabulation and manipulation. Thirdly, and this is very important, get out the vote. I've talked about this before, but the Democrats can't out-cheat our full participation. This was partly evidenced on election night in 2020. Why do you think the counting mysteriously stopped in 5 swing states on election night, which all mysteriously went for Biden the next morning? Well, I think it's because it bought them enough time to know how much they had to cheat by, so they literally came up with the number that was necessary. And of course, this is purely speculation, but think about it. This is 2024. We know how many voters live in a district. If you have, for example, 105% turnout, you know that something nefarious has happened. So if we will all show up to vote, and if we'll get others to go vote with us, they can't get away with enough voting fabrication. Fourth, if we will vote early, that enables us to be a volunteer on election day, to serve as a poll worker. We need for the majority of poll workers to be conservatives and or Christians. We need to be present. We need to have our eyes and ears there. I applied this week to work in my county in Tennessee. It took less than 5 minutes. It was incredibly easy to do. And finally, the fifth thing we must do is talk. Talk about this election integrity to others and to God. In other words, we need to share this information with our family, friends, co-workers, church families, and we need to pray. I've saved prayer for last because Christians most often use prayer as a cop-out for action. Now, God made you with hands and feet and a brain. Most of the time, God wants us to get up and do something. But the truth is that we have to have both. We have to pray and beg the Lord for help, but we also have to act. And talking is one of those things. Share this episode, text it to someone or show it to someone, and then talk about it afterwards. Now, I've saved a potential silver lining until the very end because this is all so uncertain and cloudy and murky, but I think that there is a slim chance that the replacement theory could backfire massively on the Democrats. The ideological leap between Obama and Biden is actually quite massive. The liberals have gone severely left since even the days of Obama and Clinton, Bill or Hillary. In other words, Joe Biden is radically more progressive even compared to Obama. The Obama elections were where much of this data came from. Now, just hold on to that thought. Back in September, I said, we're discussing people, we're talking about people, these immigrants who have largely traveled from countries that have long suffered from socialistic or communistic tyranny. I have been there. I've been to these places. I've experienced these firsthand. These people, by and large, live in poverty because the governing authorities have been authoritarians, or worse, totalitarians, as in Cuba, for example, for decades and decades. There have been numerous generations of Latin Americans or Africans who have suffered under these systems. So there's no doubt that the move to the United States is favorable. It looks great because they know that America is the land of opportunity and the land of prosperity. But they surely have no idea how insanely liberal these Democrats are. Many of them are fleeing violence and oppression. But they're coming to a place where Democrats are progressively creating a culture of tension, rising crime, rising violence, racism, radical gender theory, and an imploding economy. They're leaving places that are largely devoid of liberty, law, and order, and they're unwittingly coming to a place which is increasingly devoid of those same things. Listen to this article from Politico, of all outlets, from 2010 on Ronald Reagan's understanding of the Latino community. Alfonso Aguilar writes, Ronald Reagan understood Latinos. They demonstrate the importance of real work, Reagan used to say, producing things of real value, building communities of shared values that enrich America and keep us strong and free. I don't know a better description of what the Latino community is all about. Reagan was right. Latinos are hardworking. Those who migrate to the United States have made a difficult decision to leave their homeland in search of the opportunities and freedoms that our system offers. Latinos usually come here because they're frustrated with the limitations and failures of the big government in their homelands. They're fed up with an intrusive state apparatus that breeds corruption and imposes heavy tax burdens in return for deficient state-run services. These immigrants don't come to America to seek more government, they want less. Reagan was also right about the values of the Latino community. Latinos, like so many others, are defined by faith and family. That's why a majority say abortion should be illegal and that marriage is between a man and a woman. When you think about it, Latinos' values sound like conservative values. Reagan realized this better than anyone. Hispanics are conservative, he liked to say. They just don't know it. All of this simple logic and understanding of geopolitics leads me to believe that this may backfire massively against the Democrats. I can, of course, be wrong, but we'll see as we move closer to November. I think it's safe to say that the future of our civilization is at stake right now, and it's not a stretch to suggest global stability is as well. We must be victorious in order to seriously fix these electoral problems and loopholes. This is their plan to steal an election, and now we have ours to stop the steal. Now let's get to the news feed. Speaking of the 2024 election, Pew Research released their findings this week after surveying almost 9,000 Americans on their political views. And this seriously demonstrates the national divide like nothing in recent history. So let's talk about it. The survey asked a lot of questions, but I'm going to focus on one part of it. They asked Biden supporters and Trump supporters if they agreed with the following 7 statements. The first statement was, gun ownership does more to increase safety by allowing law-abiding citizens to protect themselves. 23% of Biden supporters agreed with that, while 86% of Trump supporters agreed. No surprise there. The second statement was, the legacy of slavery affects the position of black people in American society today a great deal or a fair amount. 27% of Trump supporters agreed with that. 79% of Biden supporters agreed. So with that, you can see how well the critical theorists and propagandists have succeeded with a sizable chunk of the electorate. Third, they said America's openness to people from all over the world is essential to who we are as a nation. 36% of Trump supporters agreed with that, while 87% of Biden supporters agreed. This disparity is rooted in the fundamental misunderstanding of what is good immigration and what is bad immigration. I've said it countless times. Conservatives are not opposed to immigration. We're opposed to illegal immigration. There's nothing inherently wrong with the axiomatic saying, our diversity is our strength. The problem is that when the system is weaponized against legal American citizens, this isn't uniquely an American problem either. It's happening all over the world. And you're witnessing the schisms in numerous countries all over the place. When you don't have proper and legal immigration, you have no assimilation. And when you don't have assimilation, you don't have national unity. Division wreaks its havoc and political upheaval ensues. Moving on. The fourth statement was, someone can be a man or a woman even if that is different from the sex they were assigned at birth. 9% of Trump supporters agreed with that. 59% of Biden supporters agreed. I'm shocked that 9% of Trump supporters agreed with that, but you can see just by the fourth position that we're analyzing the culture war issues here. That's where the divide is. The fifth position was, society is better off if people make marriage and having children a priority. 59% of Trump supporters agreed, while 19% of Biden supporters agreed. Again, this is depressingly low agreement. We talked a lot about this subject last month, and this is what Kansas City Chiefs kicker Harrison Butker was scrutinized for. The lack of support for this idea is one of the main reasons for our civilizational decline, mass unhappiness and depression, and population collapse. People are not focusing on having families, getting married, and even if they do, they're prioritizing their careers over that which is most important. The sixth statement was, religion should be kept separate from government policies. 56% of Trump supporters agreed with that, and 86% of Biden supporters aligned with that statement. Again, the amount of support for this position is upsetting, and it illustrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the First Amendment and the separation doctrine. These two things were obstructions to government interference in religious activity, not the obstruction of being a Christian legislator. Someone in society is going to decide what is moral and what is immoral, whether that be the Christian, the Jew, or the atheist. The whole point of freedom of religion is that no American would be forced to be a Christian or whatever. Like, we would establish some kind of theocracy as you have in Middle Eastern countries. It's a loaded statement and it can be easily misunderstood, but 59% of Trump voters agreeing with that statement that religion should be kept separate from government policies is, again, disappointing. But not as disappointing as almost all of Biden's supporters supporting that idea. Christian morality says that it's wrong to murder. Does that mean that Christian legislators can't enact laws to prevent murder? Of course not. But let's keep going. The last statement we'll look at is, there should be a national law enforcement effort to deport undocumented immigrants currently living in the United States. 63% of Trump supporters agreed with that. 11% of Biden supporters agreed. Again, this is no surprise given all that we've just discussed. Biden's radical supporters want to abolish border enforcement, or rather the whole system. And they don't even believe in the idea of a person being here illegally. All of this really illustrates how mentally depraved the left has become. But what does all of this illustrate? Well, for one, it shows us exactly who our two candidates are. Biden is opposed to gun ownership. He thinks American slavery is still affecting blacks in America today. He supports mass migration. He believes gender is fluid and is merely a subjective mental construct. He doesn't believe in the nuclear family. He's opposed to Christianity in the public square and the political sphere. And he obviously wants millions of illegal immigrants living off the taxpayer dime and participating in our elections. Trump is pro-Second Amendment. He thinks that slavery was a global problem in the past, but that blacks in America have absolutely equal opportunity and fair justice, as do every other ethnicity in America. He's opposed to mass migration. He believes gender is binary and objectively unchangeable. Trump believes in the nuclear family and probably recognizes the civilizational collapse we face if people don't have more children. And not only that, but people are scientifically proven to live happier lives when they prioritize their marriage and their family over their careers. Although I disagree with President Trump about this, he was adamantly opposed to the illegalization of IVF, saying we need more children, not less. The split of Trump supporters on religion, separate from policy, could be the complexity of the statement, because we don't know which way that's going. If it's in the true spirit of the separation doctrine or the First Amendment, then it means that the government needs to stay out of the church, not the other way around. But finally, Trump obviously opposes and is vowing to enact massive deportations if reelected. But what does all this say about American voters? Well, again, it really demonstrates the national divide we have in America. It's like we're living in two different countries. And I would almost bet you that you could draw a direct correlation between what voters believe and their religious involvement. Serious Christians have zero doubts about who they're supporting in November. They understand the importance of an armed populace, that slavery was an abhorrent practice that America fought a civil war to defeat, that countries must have legal immigration processes, that marriage and family must be valued above all else, and that Judeo-Christian morality creates the freest societies possible. Everyone else is suffering from the righteous judgment of a holy God who gives people and countries over to their own mental and spiritual depravity when they've rejected reality and the ultimate source of truth. That's the only way you can believe the stupid things they espouse. This is quite literally a battle for our nation's soul, our national identity, and who we will be. So we'll see where we stand as the days inch closer to another national election. Speaking of days, where did our days of the week get their names? I mean, when you think about it, they sound a little bit funny or abnormal. Well, believe it or not, all 7 days of the week come from either Roman or Norse gods. Sunday comes from Dia Solis, which means day of sun. Monday comes from the Latin Dies Lunae, which means day of the moon. Tuesday is named after the Norse god of war. Wednesday is named after Odin. Thursday is named after Thor. Friday after Freya, the Norse god of love and beauty. And Saturday is named after the Roman god Saturn, the god of agriculture and time. And we also have months that share similar origins. January, for example, comes from Janus, the Roman god of beginnings. February comes from Februa, the Roman festival of purification. March comes from Mars, the Roman god of war. And then there's June, which gets its name from Juno, the Roman goddess of marriage. Do you think that it's any coincidence or accident that June has been claimed as the month of celebration and pride for all the sexually perverse and those who believe marriage is something that can be redefined? Personally, I don't believe in many coincidences, but the month devoted to idolatry of sexual gratification has its American roots all the way back to the 60s, when there were apparently riots in June of 1969 in New York over police raids on gay bars. The first Pride March was the following year in June of 1970. Bill Clinton eventually declared June as Gay and Lesbian Pride Month in 1999. Obama expanded it to LGBT in 2009. And now here we are 15 years later, and we're normalizing the sexualization of children. We're punishing people for using the wrong pronouns. Parents are allowing their children to be sexually objectified. It's trendy, it's fashionable. If you're a celebrity in Hollywood, you tote your trans kid around like a Versace bag. The left has done everything in its power to normalize sexual perversion and deviancy. Well, I think they've pushed a little too far. They pushed a little too hard, and now they've awoken a sleeping dragon of parents and families who are now super vigilant to their kids being sexually abused. Here's one example in the news this week. You know how we've been calling out the sexualization of minors, and then the liberals are like, "You're crazy. No one's doing that. We don't know what you're talking about." And then one of the deviants screams and chants into a microphone, "We're here. We're queer. We're coming for your children." It's gaslighting in the extreme. And then Target is selling Pride merch for babies and little kids. Disney has high-ranking employees who are deliberately sexualizing their content. This month, Sesame Street posted a Pride Month message. Here's what Joe Biden proclaimed at the start of the month. Families across the country face excruciating decisions to relocate to a different state to protect their children from dangerous and hateful anti-LGBTQI+ laws, which target transgender children, threaten families, and criminalize doctors and nurses. These bills and laws attack our most basic values and freedoms as Americans: the right to be yourself, the right to make your own medical decisions, and the right to raise your own children. To the entire LGBTQI+ community, and especially transgender children, please know that your president and my entire administration have your back. We see you for who you are, made in the image of God and deserving of dignity, respect, and support. And that was only a short section of the full proclamation, but he mentions children there 4 times. And that's our devoutly Catholic president. So just to be clear, we're done with all the gaslighting. We know that you're coming for our children, and in case you haven't noticed, we're done with all of you. Conservatives made some seriously effective stances last year against Bud Light and Target, and it made a tangible difference. The Pride events and promotions this year have seriously cooled off. But not everyone learned this lesson. People like the YouTuber who goes by the name Miss Rachel. She makes educational videos for children which feature songs and nursery rhymes and other activities for young children. Similar to Sesame Street, Miss Rachel attempts to teach preschool-aged children about shapes and colors and numbers and letters. So what's wrong with that? Well, this video doesn't quite fit that description.
Happy Pride to all of our wonderful families and friends. This month and every month I celebrate you. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're exactly who you are. To those who are going to comment they can't watch the show anymore because of the support, no worries and much love your way. God bless. I am not chasing fame or views. I'm standing strong in love.
A lot of parents were upset with that, and understandably so. You're a preschool teacher And here you are talking about sex to an audience of 3 and 4-year-olds. What's odd is that she figured that this reaction would happen and just brushes it off like, oh, it's no big deal. God bless. I'm not trying to be famous. I just, quit my job to be a YouTuber. Love you all. And then she must have gotten more condemnation than she anticipated, so she posted another video.
I've shared prayers on here before and said, God bless. And that's because my faith is really important to me. And it's also one reason why I love every neighbor. In Matthew 22, a religious teacher asked Jesus, what's the most important commandment? And Jesus says to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. There's no greater commandments than these. I believe it's mentioned 8 times, love your neighbor. So yes, everyone belongs, everyone's welcome, everyone is treated with empathy and respect. It doesn't say love every neighbor except. There are so many reasons I stand strong in love. I stand with everyone. That's who I am. And the love back and the God bless if you disagree is genuine.
Okay, so Miss Rachel, I have a question for Miss Rachel. Someone please pass this along to her because we really need an answer to this question. Here it is. Miss Rachel, will everyone be welcomed and accepted into heaven? Here's another question for Miss Rachel. Since you like to cherry pick verses of scripture from the Bible, can you give us one single verse where Jesus affirmed someone's sin? Folks, here before us are the ailing sores of a dying church, a flock of goats who know not the shepherd's voice. Miss Rachel doesn't know the Bible, though she claims to be a Christian. She's clueless as to the fullness of biblical love. Love is not an affirmation or acceptance of something which condemns someone to eternal separation from God. Love is a gentle admonition to abandon that which separates you from God. It's not very difficult to grasp that when you read the whole Bible. The problem is, people have become their own gods, even in the so-called church. To pick and choose and decide what's right and wrong, moral and immoral, and Miss Rachel is yet another example. And parents need to just turn the TV off. But especially Miss Rachel. It was just a few weeks ago we talked about the United Methodist Church repealing its ban on gay clergy. Well, that is what led to this story from the Christian Post. 1 million United Methodists exit in one day. United Methodism's largest overseas jurisdiction has voted to quit the denomination in response to the church's divorcing sex from marriage at its governing general conference earlier this month. The United Methodist Church in the Ivory Coast voted on May 28 to exit the denomination. In 2022, this conference reportedly had over 1.2 million members, so its departure means over 1/10 of United Methodism has in one day left the denomination. When you hear the title United Methodist Church, that refers to a global church community. The UMC has a large African denomination, and this is in reference to a large congregational subset in the Ivory Coast. They observed the decisions of the General Conference to divorce sex from marriage and to allow sexual perverts to occupy leadership roles. And the entire conference left the UMC, which amounts to something close to over 1 million people. Why? What is their position? The Ivorian United Methodists said United Methodism deviates from the Holy Scriptures and prefers to sacrifice its honor and integrity to honor the LGBTQ community. LaCroix International quoted Bishop Benjamin Boney saying, "The United Methodist Church now rests on socio-cultural values that have consumed its doctrinal and disciplinary integrity." I played you the testimony of a man who lived a gay life for 20 years and then gave his life and his sexuality fully to Christ. He testified that progressive churches never seemed authentic to him. They seemed fake. Even non-believers who espouse sinful lifestyles have the wherewithal to recognize that sexual sin and biblical morality do not mix. And that's what you're going to see a lot of this month. So we have to stand firm against this in a loving, which is to say truthful, manner. What does that sound like? Well, it might sound something like this, somewhat. This is Julia Hartley-Brewer, a British radio presenter, political journalist, and newspaper columnist. This is her show on which she invites another radio personality, Shivani Dave, who is somewhat of an activist, as you'll be able to tell. Julia commits the terrible sin of not using the correct pronouns when introducing Shivani. Here's how it went.
My next guest, who is Shivani Dave. She is a journalist and a presenter at Virgin Radio, just down the corridor. Good afternoon to you, Shivani.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thanks.
You know my pronouns are they, them. How are you doing?
Yeah. Thank you for telling me your pronouns. I use correct grammar, so the only thing I would need to refer you to is to your face would be you. But I'm not being rude. You can choose your pronouns. You can choose what you want to call yourself, but you don't get to require me to use incorrect grammar and factually incorrect things. You're not a plural. You're a one person, and you're a female person. So I will use she and her. Thank you very much.
Do what you like, I guess.
Well, there you are. You didn't need to tell me then, did you?
Maybe I'm just making sure people know in case they're watching and they want to refer to me respectfully.
Is it disrespectful for me to use correct factual grammar?
It's not incorrect or unfactual grammar to use singular they them pronouns for an individual. But we're here to talk about the cast review.
Yeah, but you chose to bring it up.
You chose to use the incorrect pronouns for me.
I chose to use the
correct.
correct pronouns for a single woman who is appearing on my show.
I'm not a single woman, though. I'm a very special non-binary trans person, as you just pointed out. I
didn't
really
just
want to
point
stand
that
out in the crowd.
I didn't just point that out. I introduced you as a journalist and a Virgin Radio presenter.
No, just before I came on, you were talking about how people with all these labels like to be special. And I'm just making sure that everyone knows I'm special.
Okay, I'm not special. I'm just a boring old heterosexual married woman. But, sorry about that. We're not allowed to do that anymore.
I love it. Julia didn't give in to the delusion and the redefinition of words. She was respectful and honest. All Christians have to do is that, plus the good news of the gospel. One more story before we go. I grew up watching Michael Jordan in the 90s, and I loved the Miami Heat before LeBron James showed up. But I've since boycotted the NBA for a host of reasons. Black Lives Matter, COVID propaganda, and it's basically just a vast theater production with a slew of dramatic actors, LeBron James being one of the finest. But apparently, the NBA Finals are going on right now. It's the Dallas Mavericks and the Boston Celtics. The Celtics are leading the series, and their coach, Joe Mazzulla, was doing a post-game interview on Sunday, and he gave an answer that caused an awkward silence in the room. Take a look.
Hey, Joe, Ben School, Yahoo Sports. For the first time since 1975, this is the NBA Finals where you have two black head coaches. Given the plight sometimes of black head coaches in the NBA, do you think this is a significant moment? Do you take pride in this? How do you view this, or do you not see it at all?
I wonder how many of those have been Christian coaches. David Aldridge?
First of all, I think people are getting tired of the first this and first that. But the reporter wants to make a big deal about the fact that this final series is the first time since 1975 that you have two black head coaches playing against each other. Okay, what's your point? That's pretty much how Joe reacts. The reporter described the plight of black coaches in the NBA. Are you kidding me? But he asks Coach Mazzulla about this, and Joe says, I wonder how many of those have been Christian coaches. And the room is dead silent. No one knew how to respond, so I will. And I'll interpret for the coach, for all the sports analysts out there and the trolls on the internet. Yes, Joe Mazzulla is a black man. Yes, he is a professional basketball coach. And yes, he is on his way to being the best coach in the whole basketball world. But what actually matters? What really matters? This truly depicts the undermining of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision for blacks in America. What did he say? What did he say on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in his I Have a Dream speech in 1963? I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged. They will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. This is the essence of what Coach Mazzulla is articulating. His response expresses this very idea. So what if this is the first time since 1975 that both head coaches in the finals are black? What matters is their character. That's why he said, I wonder how many of those have been Christian. Because that's what actually matters. That's what is most important. But no, today we live in a society where it's increasingly focused on melanin levels, skin color. We live in a culture which is increasingly hostile to Christians and pandering to people of colors that aren't white. So now, just for that comment, I hope the Celtics win the series. Well, that's going to do it for me. What'll it be next time? We'll see. For now, go and be the salt and light you were meant to be, and we'll see you next time on We the Free. Thanks for watching this clip. Listen, I want to make sure that you stay informed on the news and the biblical response to it. So do yourself and us a favor and hit the subscribe button before you go. And then we would love for you to check out WeTheFreeShow.com to grab yourself some merch to spread the word of We the Free. And we're also going to put a video we think you'll like on the screen. Now go be that salt and light, and we'll see you next time.